Ashley Brilliant with Pot Shots is one of my favorite cartoons. Saw one a few days ago. Ashley said there's been so much fear about what might happen that what's actually happened has passed almost unnoticed. You understand that, don't you? Our concern about life. Well, we don't call it fear because hardly any one of us is afraid. Right? Wrong. We're just afraid of admitting it. And so we call it concern. Mothers call it worry. That's such a noble word, worry. Be careful. Be careful. Lock your doors. Look under the bed when you get home at night. I'm not putting mothers down, but I'm putting fear down because it is acquired. And fear robs us of our lives. We don't get to live our lives. We live an imaginary life. We live a life that is always pointing somewhere else so that we're never where we are fully experiencing the world, this wonderful, beautiful world. Because fear has us looking backward or forward in an imaginary world that has no reality and no vitality. In these first two lessons, based on the joy of living free of fear, we made a commitment to attack the fear that has been attacking us, to acknowledge, to admit it, some particular specific area of fear that has been primary in our lives. And those of you who have done this, indicate that you have by raising your hand. That's wonderful. I can tell you what happened. If you really did it, all hell broke loose. Well, I could say all heaven broke loose because that really is what it is. If you haven't faced your fear, and only about half of the hands in here went up, with all of the urgency at my command, I urge you to get honest with yourself and to look at your life and to examine your life. Because if you have a major problem, and you do have a major problem, everyone does. Everybody does. If you have a major problem, then I can assure you that fear is at the bottom of it. If you will face your problem, ultimately, in order to solve your problem, you're going to have to face your fear. The fear that is back of it, the fear that has caused it, and the element in your life which will guarantee that that problem or one like it will never go away. We cannot solve our problems without facing our fear. Do you believe that about yourself? Absolutely. So if you have a problem, that's wonderful. Now, why did I say that if you really are serious about overcoming your fear, that all hell broke loose? Or heaven? Because it's a heavenly thing. Let me tell you why. As long as we are wimps, fear doesn't have to do very much to control us. You know what I mean by wimpish? As long as we're sort of mushing along, living in the little box, doing what we do, and we're sort of withdrawing from life, fear has us licked. It doesn't have to exert any influence at all. But the moment that you decide that you are going to do something about the main issues in your life, the moment that you begin to get honest with yourself and confront yourself, all hell breaks loose. I've had some people come to me this week and said, I don't know whether it's worth it or not. And of course it's worth it. One person told me that they started facing their fear, and it was the first time in her life that she ever had a panic attack. Is that good or bad? It's good. It really is good because something is beginning to happen. An analogy might be, imagine a group of people going to a party, and couples are going to a couple's party. When do they fight? On the way to the party? No. When do they fight? On the way home. Isn't that true? Sure. After something happens. And that's the kind of struggle that begins to take place in our minds. It's when we decide that we're going to begin to enjoy our life. We're going to do the things that need to be done by us, and life is going to become an adventure. Your life should be an adventure. And I can almost guarantee that for most of us it is not, because we have our little track, a little Monday, this is what I do. Tuesday, this is what I do. Wednesday, this is what I do and think. And Thursday, let's see, Thursday's 2 days away. I can't remember. You hear what I'm saying? Your life should be an adventure. The last lesson I finished on the note of having read Sandy's letter, where I suggested that she examine, or that she consider the worst case scenario. Remember that she was afraid of driving and had imagined herself having a major wreck on a highway. And I said that if you or I would like to conquer our fear, that a very effective tool, and one that will probably ultimately be necessary for all of us, is to face the worst thing that can possibly happen to us. Now, the word scenario means an outline of an imaginary chain of events. And so the worst case scenario is the imaginary chain of events that your mind has already imaged. And fear is using. Now, it's very important that you see that your fear and the imaginary chain of events are not the same thing. Are you following me? Fear does not want you to face the imaginary chain of events, because if you did, fear would begin to disappear. The moment that you face a fear, the moment that you really walk right up to it and look it in the eye, it will begin to dissipate, because that's the nature of fear. It doesn't want you to do that. It always wants you to turn away and never, ever quite make a decision. Never, ever decide anything. Fear does not want you to decide. It wants to immobilize you. So if you take your fear, the problem, and write out a describe to yourself, and the worst case scenario is already there, and walk right up to it. Walk into your imagination and look around and look fear in the eye. Watch what happens. Something wonderful will begin to happen. You will feel a sense of empowerment. It doesn't mean that that your fear will suddenly disappear, but a new sense of worth, a new feeling of strength, something new. It will be as though a presence greater than yourself is there. A new factor will be added to your life. Empowerment begins to come. And then what you do, in the worst case scenario, you change it to the first case scenario, meaning how you would like for it to happen. See, in your creative imagination, you can change anything to anything, can't you? This place used to be a swamp. It used to be a swamp. And there were little frogs and green snakes crawling around right here where this wonderful building is. And the only thing that changed was someone's imagination. You can change the worst case scenario to the first case scenario. If you're afraid of driving and if you fear that you'll have an accident, then keep working with your creative imagination until you see yourself doing exactly what you want to do, driving effectively, driving across these expressways precisely the way you want to drive, free and easy, day or night, and joyously. Let me give an example that fits me. I took up skiing a few years ago, and I started skiing in Snowmass, Colorado. The first day I was on Bunny Hill, but the second day I went up on a ski lift, and I watched those people flying down those slopes under me. I was on the ski lift looking down. And I tell you, my imagination had to work overtime for me to think that I would ever be able to ski like that. Because I had just remembered what happened 10 minutes ago. Just standing up on skis was not all that easy. You know what I'm talking about. And I had to cause my mind to believe that I could do that. I had to imagine it and feel it and think it and practice it. And so as I rode up on ski lifts, I saw myself, I would pick up somebody just skiing down that slope like really doing it. Free and easy. And guess what? I can do it. I can do it. But suppose that I had let the fear of skiing, the fear of falling, the fear of getting up to the top of that hill, and I'll tell you it's a frightening thing the first few times that you do it. Suppose I let that fear control me. I would have found wonderful reasons not to do it anymore. Just marvelous reasons. Do you understand what I'm talking about? But any time that I find something that I'm afraid to do, I'm going to do it. And every time I've ever faced a fear and conquered it, the results, the rewards have been so incredibly exciting that I don't know how to report them to you. A new part of me emerges. But take your fear, and your fear will paint negative pictures in your mind, will it not? Of course it does. Then you take charge of your mind, and you paint the positive pictures and the positive feelings in your mind. Walk out of your fear and say, you have no power over me. There's so many wonderful stories in the Bible about how to face our fear and overcome it. And one of the most powerful that we have heard of is the story of David and Goliath. Remember that story? David, the shepherd boy who became the king. David, who happens to be one of my favorite characters because he's like all of us. He's like all of us because he made so many mistakes. He got himself in and out of so much trouble. And he had to struggle to believe in him, in his higher self, and to believe in God. And while he was believing, he also didn't believe. Do you understand David? Of course you do. Well, the story begins not as the story of David and Goliath, but really the story of David and Saul. Now, Saul was the king, the first king of Israel. And Saul had started off as a very privileged young man, meaning he had been anointed with the Spirit of God. But Saul didn't really believe in God. He believed more in Saul than he did in himself, and I know you understand that. Saul represents the ruling consciousness that's in us, the first king, our ego, our self-defeating ego. Are you following my drift? Saul, in time, came to be ruled, you'll never guess by what? By fear. As a matter of fact, Saul went insane and did some crazy things because of his fear. Now, Goliath appeared to Saul's army. See, David wasn't in the story yet. Now, the conflict that continued between Saul and David is the conflict between the two stages or facets of our own mind. Saul represents the first or human dominating consciousness that we're dealing with all the time. The part of us that really is kind of insane or goofy, that does strange things. Is there a part of you that has done strange things? Yes. It's made all kinds of mistakes. There's a part of you that believes in God but really doesn't. Do you understand that part of you? And there's another part of you that's like a shepherd, a shepherd boy, a young person, innocent and vital and alive, anointed, if you will. You see, this is the conflict. The fearful one, the goofy one, the crazy one, the self-concerned one, the one who prays but doesn't really believe it. But the one who is in charge, the dominating, controlling personality that's frightened and selfish and self-concerned, that's Saul. And Goliath, what does Goliath represent? Goliath is your major problem. Goliath is the thing that confronts you, the giant that comes and stands in your way. And when Goliath appeared and spoke to Saul and his army, all of his army was paralyzed, meaning, they were frightened. Fear does that. Have you noticed that fear will paralyze you? That you just simply, it takes your breath away. It takes your courage away. It takes your enthusiasm away. It takes your joy away. All of Saul's army retreated. Isn't that what happened when fear attacks you? Now listen to the story. I won't go into it in full detail. Then Goliath came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was a giant of a man. Now listen to what fear will do in terms of exaggerating. He was a giant of a man measuring over 9 feet tall. Isn't that the way you describe your problem? He wore a bronze helmet, a 200-pound coat of mail, bronze leggings, and carried a bronze javelin several inches thick, tipped with a 25-pound iron spearhead, and his armor-bearer walked ahead of him with a huge shield. And he stood and shouted across to the Israelis, "Send me a man who will fight with me." And then when Saul and the Israeli army heard this, they were dismayed and frightened. That's what fear does. I mean, it just paralyzes you. And your fear's been talking to you exactly that same way and says, you don't stand a chance. That's what Goliath was saying. Don't even try. That's what fear says. Don't even try. It won't work. Who do you think you are? And Saul, our human consciousness, said, that's right. That's right. Now, David was a shepherd boy, and he was carrying some lunch to his brother, who was one of the soldiers. So David left the sheep with another shepherd, and he arrived at the outskirts of the camp just as the Israeli army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. And as he was talking with them, he saw Goliath, the giant, step out from the Philistine troops and shout his challenge to the army of Israel. As soon as they saw him, the Israeli army began to run away in fright. Have you seen the giant, the soldiers were asking? He's insulted the entire army of Israel. And have you heard about the huge reward the king has offered to anyone who kills him? Saul offered one of his daughters to anybody that would kill the giant. And whoever did it, he and his whole family would not have to pay taxes anymore. Now, if that's not a reward that will trigger your imagination, tell me what is. Don't worry about a thing, David told him. I'll take care of this Philistine. Now, this little shepherd boy. Don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. How can a kid like you fight with a man like this? But David persisted. Now, this is a very important point. If you're going to attack your fear, David said, the Lord who saved me from the claws and teeth of the lion and the bear while I was tending those sheep will save me from this Philistine. Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. And David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step, and he said, I can hardly move, and he took it off again. And what this part of the story means is that our old consciousness is trying to fight the battle with its old consciousness. The new self of us, the emerging self of us, which is the only one that can overcome fear. This one believes in God, but our ego wants to put its armor of fear upon your inner self. Does this make any sense to you at all? Fear again wants to reign. And David said, I can't move with these old ideas. Saul, I can't fight this battle with your armor. And so he took it off. Then he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them in his shepherd's bag, which represents the 5 human senses. And armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, started across to Goliath. And Goliath walked toward David with his shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at the nice little red-cheeked boy. And he cursed David by the names of his gods. In other words, fear was trying to intimidate. And today, David said, the Lord will conquer you. The Lord will conquer you. And I will kill you and cut off your head. Cut off the head of fear. No longer be afraid. And that's exactly what happened. But do you see this as a metaphor for the process that must take place in us? Find your fear. Face your fear. But don't let your ruling consciousness, your old ideas, the part of you that has tried to overcome your fear before and failed, go out to attack it because it won't work. Call upon this new self of you, this emerging self, your real self, the part of you that believes in God, the part of you that is innocent and pure and excited and alive, the part of you that wants to awaken, the David part of you. And David represents the early stages of Christ emerging in each one of us. There was an interesting article in one of the newspapers this morning about some divers who are working right at this very moment, perhaps in the Detroit River. Divers take dark forays in search of zebra mussels. When he dives into a water-filled shaft that leads 160 feet beneath the Detroit River, Rob McNutt can't afford fear. And he's 160 feet deep, and along with 7 other divers who are discovering those new zebra mussels that are in the Great Lakes water system. so that they can be removed. McNutt firmly insists that he doesn't get scared. He merely visualizes his escape from the pipe off Bell Island. In other words, if he happens to think about what would happen if his mask developed a leak or his airline was cut, he has already imagined the worst, but he changes the scenario to how he will escape. Isn't that precisely what I said to you a few minutes ago? This is a man whose life is living very dangerously. And he knows it could happen, but he's already prepared for what will happen. He does not let fear attack him. He attacks fear because he knows exactly what's going to happen. Fear, F-E-A-R, has been defined as false evidence appearing as real. False evidence appearing as real. Really, it's not that way at all. False evidence appearing as real. I had an interesting experience almost exactly a year ago to the week. Went to Chicago to attend the Church Growth Development Conference there with Kathy Tetrault, my assistant. She was with me, and at that time I met her sister, Mary Bennett, for the first time. And let me begin this story by telling you that Mary is a very talented young woman who has a very fine job with a large corporation. She has a very responsible position. She's a recovering person. But her life had narrowed down to about the size of a small box. Her life had become more and more narrow because fear was controlling her life. But our meeting was less than exciting for both of us, I assume, because she already didn't like me before I got there. And was certainly less than impressed after I did arrive. She really wanted me to know that, in a very nice way, mind you, she was very nice about it, that probably her sister's greatest mistake was working for me. Now that's maybe not exactly what she thought, but there were elements of that were involved. Anyhow, this last year I've seen some of the most remarkable changes take place in Mary, one of which is that we dearly like each other and love each other because she's been facing a fear. Come up here, Mary Bennett. You know, every one of you has a story, an incredible story, and I could bring each one of you up on the platform, but Mary happened to be passing through Detroit today, and she was here about a month ago, as a matter of fact, and although she had been really working on her fear, tell us what happened on that particular day a month ago when you were here visiting Kathy.
Actually, I was, as Jack said, working on getting much, much better with my fear and with where I had been since last May. And I was over in the annex, and Kathy and a couple of friends had decided to go shopping. And I, kind of quibbed out my usual, I hate shopping. I'm not going. I hate shopping. I've always hated shopping. It's just kind of like one of those girly kind of things to do, and I'm too important and too busy, and I'm not going shopping.
But really, people who hate shopping, like you did, it's what you were afraid of shopping.
It had nothing to do with hate. I was scared to death of going in a shopping mall. And I'd been for a while, and I had no idea why. I knew I would get petrified. I'd get panic attacks when I went to a shopping mall, and it just scared me to death. So I let them go shopping, and I stayed home and was reading a self-help book, which is my way sometimes of what I think of is recovering, is to read my way out of it. And, I've read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of self-help books, and I'm still afraid to go in a shopping mall. And I'm like, I'm still here, I'm by myself, I'm isolated, I'm alone, and they're out having fun. And I'm just really sick of living my life this way. I'm sick of it. And, I see all the people around me not living their lives that way. So I came over here, I decided that's it. I'm going to try, and I'm going to go. I'm at least going to walk over and find out where the shopping mall is. So I walked over here, and I thought I'd sneak into the bookstore and ask somebody. And
sneak in and not meet me, that's really what...
The last person I wanted to run into was Jack, even though we've certainly like each other a lot more now than when we first met. It's changed a lot. I didn't want him to see me in this state. I wanted to, I'm okay. So I see Jack, and he says, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, pretty good." And I'm trying to, not quiver and hide the tears. And he's like, "Well, pretty good isn't good enough." And so I started, he said, "Come on in and let's talk." So we talked a little bit, and I finally admitted, I'm scared to death to go shopping. I'm just, afraid to go in the store, and I'm afraid to go grocery shopping sometimes. And it's real embarrassing for somebody who, I look at some of the things I do in my professional life and my job, and sometimes I can't believe it when I'm admitting that I'm afraid to do stupid things like this. And Jack helped me a lot. It's still the thing that he told me still it helps me today. And that's the reason I think I've grown to love Jack is I see it work. I see the things that he says work, and it's helped me. He just picked up a set of keys and said, "When are you going to decide to let go of it? It's that quick." And dropped the keys. And I'm looking at him going, "No, you don't. You want to analyze me or something? Or let's find out, did something happen when I was 3 that I don't like to shop? Or figure it out." And he's like, "Just decide to let go of it." And I sat there for a minute, and I said, "All right, now." And it was amazing. We talked for a couple more minutes, and I walked out. And I'm afraid to drive also. I haven't owned a car for like 7 years. I walked out. I got in this car. I drove over to the shopping mall. I never found Kathy or her friends, but I ended up shopping. And not only that, I got out of my self-centeredness that plagues me frequently and bought gifts for other people. And I had a really good time. And I was walking through the parking lot afterwards, and I'm looking up in the sky, and I'm like, God, I don't get it. It was amazing, the difference. So just, I guess walking through it, just calling fear's bluff and saying, wait a minute, there isn't anything to this. There really isn't. But by myself, sitting there, it grows.
Isn't that exciting? Mary flew over today from Chicago. She works in Chicago, and she didn't come into the regular airport. She came into the city airport. Different airline, different airport. And did you have to work on that?
Yes. I will go places if I've been there before. I know the exact track I'm going to go. I know exactly who I'm going to see. I know that I take cabs to the airport. I know there'll be a cab out there waiting for me. And I know the airlines and the seat and how I'm going to be okay. And today I needed to get in earlier, and so I ended up flying out of Midway instead of O'Hare and flying into City instead of Detroit Metro. And at first, my fears told me, it's a small airport, it's a small airline, it's raining, you're going to crash, you're flying Southwest, they're all goofy. And I'm just, all this stuff I'm listening to, and it just amazed me. I'm like, I'm okay. There isn't anything wrong. And as we're flying, there was a lot of turbulence, and it's going boom, boom, boom. And from listening to the tapes, I was thinking, am I afraid to die? And I thought, no, I know for sure I'm coming back because I'm not done. That's a definite. I've got a lot of things to work on, so it's a big change.
Mary, what a wonderful story. Oh, thank you. Someone said, my grandmother rode in a horse and carriage, but she was afraid to ride in a car. My mother rode in a car, but she was afraid to ride in a plane. I ride in a plane, but I'm afraid to ride in a jet. My daughter rides in a jet, but she's afraid to ride in a horse and carriage. So what goes around comes around, doesn't it? Fear doesn't care. It's always going to keep you from doing what it is that you have to do. If you've known Ron Scott, if you'd ever met Ron Scott, you never would have believed that he was afraid of anything in life. Look at him. You would not have believed it. And if you had been aware of the peak performer that he is and the high-profile life that he had lived and he had experienced and still was in the business world, you surely would have known that fear was not a problem with Ron Scott. I guess I first noticed that Ron was afraid once when he and Lenore visited my apartment. I live on the 18th floor, which is not all that high. And there were some other guests there, and I have I think, a lovely view of Lake St. Clair. And so first-time guests were over at the windows looking out and down at the view. Ron chose to observe the view from somewhere in the very center of the room, like this. No one else noticed it. but I noticed it. And there were some other occasions when I noticed it. Ron was afraid of heights. 2 or 3 years ago, we were taking a cruise together, and one of the most exciting experiences, as a matter of fact, what happened to Ron triggered such a surge of enthusiasm with all 225 or 50 of us who were together on that cruise ship. Our group. There were 1,000 people on the cruise ship. Ron Scott, come up and tell us about what happened to you there. This is Ron Scott, who happens to be the president of the board of this church.
Thank you, Jack. That visit to your apartment really changed my life. Fear had been in charge of my life, and not only did I not acknowledge it, I wasn't even aware of it. But Jack took the occasion when he and I were alone later to say that he had observed that I had fear, and I said, yes, I've always had a fear of heights for as long as I can remember. And he told me something that I'll never forget. He said, it isn't just a fear of heights, it's fear that's working within you. And it's choosing to express itself in the fear of heights. But it's fear that you're dealing with and you haven't dealt with. And I thought about that. I accepted that with some reluctance and thought about it over the next couple of years on various occasions. And I had the sense that there would be opportunities come along that would allow me to deal with that at some point. And sure enough, it did on a visit to Vancouver when we were on our Alaskan cruise. And it happened that Jack and some of us were taking a tour of the city, and we were on our way up to a mountaintop with a cable car that took you up there. And on the way driving to the site,
you were really not overly excited about taking that cable car up to the top of that mountain. Is that true?
That's true. Just the cable car alone was about all I could muster to handle. But on the way up there, someone observed that there was the world's longest swinging bridge that was just off of the way, and they said, how about if we go across that swinging bridge? Wouldn't that be wonderful? And I pretended to ignore the comment.
I was there in the same vehicle, the same van. I immediately looked back to see Ron. What was Ron's approach to the swinging bridge? It was totally, he was not into that swinging bridge at all.
No. I knew I wasn't going to be able to make it. At that point in time, Jack said, we're going to be tight for time, but let's come back tomorrow and do the swinging bridge. Well, I felt like that gave me a lot of time to plan my escape for the swinging bridge, and I thought maybe it would go away, but it didn't go away, and so there was a plan to go over the swinging bridge, and I was along as part of the group, but it was easy enough for me to say, well, I just won't choose the swinging bridge. I'll go along with the group, but I'll observe everybody else doing it. Something in me didn't set well with that. There was a feeling that I had to deal with this. I had to be part of this, and sometimes fear seems to pick these the universe chooses these visible situations in which you're forced to confront something. For so long, I had been able to deny that I had fear or overlook it. But here was something very concrete where my friends were going to be there observing this. And so I had to deal with it.
Time, just for a second. Everybody here has that same thing in their life right now. They may not be admitting it, but everybody has a swinging bridge confronting you in some form right now. And you know it's true. Excuse me, Ron.
So I made the decision that I was going to go across that swinging bridge. And something in me, when I said, I'm going to do it across that swinging bridge, settled down. And I felt somehow not totally at ease with it, but it was going to be okay. And I knew God was going to take over, that it was going to be all right. So when we got to that swinging bridge, I couldn't wait to get out there on the swinging bridge and to make it across and to demonstrate to myself that I would overcome this. I felt like there was going to be an overcoming through this experience. And it turned out to be a wonderful, life-changing experience for me.
He was the first one across the swinging bridge, and that's a fact. Now, when we were ready to come back, I raced across the bridge with my camera. I wanted to get a picture of Ron coming across the bridge. Okay? I'm a pretty good photographer. I took the most perfect photograph I have ever taken in my life of Ron coming back across the swinging bridge. And if you're listening on tape, I wish you could see it. Look at the joy. Hands in the air. And look back behind him, and you'll see the people standing in the center of the bridge looking over like this. It was 300 feet to the ground. And Ron was exalted. This is what facing your fear does to you, doesn't it, Ron?
Oh, it does.
Let me tell you something else that I did with Ron last year. I decided to go skydiving. And Ron said, I wish you hadn't decided that. Is that true?
It is.
Because he knew that he had to go skydiving. Did we go skydiving together?
We sure did.
And I have some wonderful photographs of Ron getting in that plane. I have a photograph of him getting out of the plane. I was on the ground. I had already jumped and was on the ground. And there in the distance, I had my long lens, and there is in the distance is his parachute opening. And what you can't hear on that film is his shout. Let me tell you, he was 2 miles away in the air, and we could hear him shout with joy when his parachute opened. Was it exciting?
Oh, it was exciting. It sure was, Jack. And, you know, fear has really become my friend, because there was a time when I felt that fear was to be avoided. But now I see that it can alert me to the situations in my life that I need to deal with. And it isn't just heights now. It's relationships, it's situations in my business, it's whatever it is that comes up. If I feel that fear coming up, I know, one, that I've got to deal with it, and two, that if I turn it over to God, everything's going to be all right.
Suppose you never faced that first fear of heights. Suppose you were still standing in the middle of a room looking at the view.
I'd still be boxed in. My life wouldn't have opened up as it has.
When we face our fear, something wonderful begins to happen. The David in us, the wonderful new being that we are, comes alive, doesn't it, Ron Scott?
Oh, it does.
Ron, what are we going to do next? We'll think of something more.
Something exciting. Thanks.
Ralph Waldo Emerson said, the hero is no braver than an ordinary person, but he's brave 5 minutes longer. And it's not just an ordinary person or a brave 5 minutes longer. It is choosing to do something that the Saul in you, that the ruling consciousness in you, that the loser in you chooses not to do. Winners know how to endure anxiety and transform their fears into the energy of accomplishment. And that's exactly what Ron said to you, that he uses his fear in a most positive way, that fear has become his friend. We'll never reach the place where we will not find some things that we're not anxious or concerned about, and that's wonderful, because the moment that we find that anxiety is there, it's merely a signal, like touching a hot stove that says, oops, something needs my attention. Something needs my awareness. Something needs my focus. But fear does not want us to be focused. It does not want us to face it. Example, fear of failure prevents commitment. I was talking to a woman this week who's been attending these classes. And for years and years, she's been trying to lose weight. And she asked me why she had not lost weight. And we talked for a moment, and it became very apparent, very simple. Because the fear of failure has prevented her from making the commitment. She has been on every diet you can think of. Every slim, trim, eat it, drink it, read it, run it. She's done it. Hasn't worked. And the reason it hasn't worked is because there's been no commitment. She has done it to fail. Fear sets us up for failure, whether it's losing weight or stopping smoking. I've told you the story once about a secretary that I had who had made a commitment to stop smoking. I came back from a trip and walked into my office, and she had a package of cigarettes opened on the desk with one cigarette sticking out, and a book of matches that had, with the cover was folded back. One match was out, maybe two matches in case the first one did not strike or out of the cover. And I said, Evelyn, what are you doing? She said, I'm quitting smoking. And I said, what's the cigarette in the match there for? She said, just in case it doesn't work. Fear says the same thing. Just in case it doesn't work, which means that it really isn't going to work. Harry Emerson Fosdick said, fear imprisons, faith liberates. Fear paralyzes, faith empowers. Fear disheartens, faith encourages. Fear sickens, faith heals. Fear makes useless, faith makes serviceable. And most of all, fear puts hopelessness at the heart of life while faith rejoices in God. David said in the 27th Psalm, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? When evil men come to destroy me, they will stumble and fail. Yes, though a mighty army marches against me, my heart shall know no fear. I am confident that God will save me. You think that David was unafraid when he said that? He's probably scared to death. But he was affirming that he would not be afraid. He was calling upon that spiritual side of himself. And our fourth lesson that we'll share together next week will be a time that we will spend talking about the different techniques that we will use on a continuing basis for the rest of our lives to overcome our fear. As a matter of fact, to convert the challenges that fear would keep us from facing into the most wonderful and exciting opportunities and joyous moments of our lives. The most joyous moment that you will ever live in this life will be those incredible moments when you face your fear and win. And every time you really face your fear, you will win. Do you believe that that is true? Robert Schuller's prayer for courage. I have it. My fears are going, gone. I feel a mysterious, calm, quiet, tranquil assurance rising deep within my being. This remarkable spirit of courage is overpowering me. It's the very presence of God working peace at the core of my invisible soul. Thank you, Lord. All my fears are gone. What a relief. Amen. And I'm sure that this is what David felt, and what Mary has felt, and what Ron Scott has felt, and what every one of us can feel every day of our lives when we face our fears. The joy of living free of fear is yours for the taking. And that's the way it really is.